Good day, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you might be in the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 34. I'll cut that out. So now, where are we going? I'm going to play us some music, as I usually do.
Daisy, Daisy, la 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 la. Daisy, Daisy, she's my joy and she's my pride. She sure looks cute in her camouflage suit. Daisy's always by my side. The other night my Daisy was lying on my bed, reclining on my pillow where I lay my head. She was a little oiled, but she looked so serene, lying there relaxing with her magazine. Daisy, Daisy, she's my joy and she's my pride. She sure looks cute in her camouflage suit. Daisy's always by my side. The day that we were called out with the fire force, the chopper that we flew was backing like a horse. Her safety catch was off as I was jumping out, and after that I cocked her and stuck one up the spout. Daisy, Daisy, she's my joy and she's my pride. She sure looks cute in her camouflage suit. Daisy's always by my side. Ambush in the valley, lying in the grass. Just like any woman, she was full of gas. I had to get her ready so she could do the job, and so to regulate her, I fiddled with her knobs. Daisy, Daisy, she's my joy and she's my pride. She sure looks cute in her camouflage suit. Daisy's always by my side. Some folks think the song's a little blue, but when you analyze it, it's up to you. So for your information, I'll sing the song again, 'cause Daisy's only my service FM. Daisy, Daisy, she's my joy and she's my pride. She sure looks cute in her camouflage suit. Daisy's always by my side.
Okay, that was Daisy by John Edmund, and it's a song from the Rhodesian Bush War, and it's about his FN rifle. So there we go. There's some good songs from the Rhodesian Bush War, many of which John Edmonds has got on his YouTube channel, which I suggest people go and have a look at. So how are we going this evening, gentlemen? Or this morning for me, but this evening for you guys.
Yeah, all good.
Okay.
I'm fine. I thought we were going to go around the panel.
I am. I was just asking people how they were, giving a few more people a chance to get in. Okay, Adam, anything you'd like to bring up to start with?
Well, I suppose we could jump into this Archbishop thing.
Absolutely.
Hang on, I haven't got the article up. So some people have been celebrating recently about the Archbishop of York, talking about how English people feel left behind by metropolitan elites. And I mean, he kind of meanders around it a bit, but I thought it was kind of funny because there's this article that I remember seeing. I've just brought it up. It's from July last year, so it's quite old. And he was the incoming Archbishop of York. He was very new to his station, and he stated his support for Black Lives Matter, and insisted that Jesus was a black man. And he also had brought into his cathedral a painting. I forget the woman that paints it. She paints a lot of stuff along these lines, where she takes like classical European artwork and then just supposes black people into it. So she had the Last Supper with Jesus in the middle as a black man,
which he couldn't conceivably have been given where he was born.
Well, I mean, the race thing's kind of contentious on the topic, isn't it? Because like people will argue over whether he was or he wasn't, and then you've got groups of people that just say, well, it doesn't actually matter. It's not important. But
I mean, he was where he was born in Palestine or Israel or whatever you want to call it. It was those guys are Semitic, so like he might have looked like an Egyptian or an Israeli today, but he certainly wasn't black.
Well, yeah, and that area had been like heavily colonized by the Greeks for
loads,
centuries. But
loads of Greeks. Yep.
well, yeah, I mean, I'm more along the lines that it doesn't matter, but he seems to think it does, even though the people that would defend him would try to play to my heartstrings and say it doesn't matter. I mean, clearly it matters to someone if they're willing to go out there and make portraits, reimagine Renaissance era portraits like this, and also sort of display them at taxpayers' expense.
Have you, Adam? Have you ever seen those mummy portraits from Egypt?
No.
Oh, they're really good. I mean, so lifelike, it's unbelievable. And they were painted by Romanized Egyptians on their coffin lids. And like you can Google it or you DuckDuckGo it or whatever search engine you use, and you can go and look at those, and they are very, very lifelike portraits of people from like mostly a little bit later than when Jesus was alive, but not that later. And you can clearly see they're not black Africans. They're just not, And that's from Egypt, which, if anything, would have had more black Africans than Palestine did. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I kind of often look at like the imagery done by the Coptic Christians, because they existed quite close to that time, and some of the earliest imagery that we have of Jesus is from them.
Yeah.
And it depicts him as being I'm not going to say white, because that depends on what you define as white, but he's quite pale skinned, quite light skinned.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at modern people in certainly in Syria and Iran and let me think, Lebanon, and also obviously Israel, Palestine, and they're not black, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff's interesting too. I mean, the thing is, when I saw this, I was more thinking, why has he had this change of face? Why was he so quick to play up to sort of the spurrings of metropolitan elites a year ago, and now he's completely flipped on a dime?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I said to you before the show, I wasn't going to comment on this because I don't know anything about it. But it does strike me as strange that he's suddenly now saying that like ordinary British people outside the city elites now feel like they're being treated as if they're xenophobic and all the rest of it. But mind you, I mean, that assumes, of course, that you think xenophobia is a bad thing, which I'm not entirely sure it is. But there we go.
Yeah, I mean, I should have looked up, like, well, I assume we wouldn't have accurate figures on how populated his services were. Not over the last year anyway.
So where is he based?
He's in York.
Oh, okay. Well,
Which
that's a fairly traditional area, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, York itself is a funny one, because York I mean, like, the Tories were going to move the government there during the House of Commons refit, a refurbishment. And Labour was dead set against it. And of course, Labour tried to paint it as, oh, it's about roads, it's about infrastructure, blah, 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 blah. But I mean, we know they wanted to move it to Birmingham. We know why they want to move it to Birmingham, because they want Tory MPs to stay surrounded by the same sort of demographics and sort of political groups that they would be if they were in London.
Yeah.
But York is still a funny one, because even though it's like, largely white, largely English, quite old school, it's like a Lib Dem stronghold. So
is it?
Yeah.
I mean, presumably just the city itself rather than the surrounding area.
Yeah, the city itself.
Yeah.
Let me just double check if it's actually a if it's actually a Lib Dem stronghold, or if it's just Lib Dem held.
York's quite an interesting city, of course, because it has a lot of Viking history as well as the Anglo-Saxon stuff going on there.
Yeah, its original name was Etherwich. So
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure if it had a Latin name, but I know its Saxon name was Ethelwich.
Yeah. And then the Vikings ran it for quite a long time, I believe.
Yes, it was the southernmost point of Danelaw for about 100 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were some quite big battles around it, as I recall, as well, in the sort of Dark Ages period.
Yeah. I don't know much about that in particular.
I've just seen Baron Badger in the chat. I don't know if 2 Roman emperors were declared there. I know that Constantine was declared emperor there.
Yes.
But also I think Septimus Severus died there, if I remember correctly. The guy who was succeeded by Caracalla.
Eboracum, that's it. Yes, Eboracum.
Yeah.
Or Eboracum. Depends on your version of Latin.
Yeah. But yeah, as I say, I'm not sure if 2 Roman emperors were declared there, but certainly I know Constantine was declared emperor there. But and Septimus Severus, who was a pretty major figure as a Roman emperor, he actually died there, telling his sons to look after the soldiers and ignore everybody else, as I recall.
Okay, so yeah, I'm looking, and it's for MPs, Inner York is Labour, Outer York is Conservative, and for the council, it's a split of Lib Dem and Labour.
Yeah, it's no surprise that.
Yeah. But Baron Badger, I'm pretty sure that Caracalla was actually declared emperor with his brother, wasn't he? Who he subsequently murdered because they hated one another. I don't know. I couldn't imagine killing my brother. I have to say, I've got a brother, but I couldn't imagine killing him.
What? Not even to assume him onto the throne?
No, not even that. No, and he's a younger brother anyway, so I'd have an advantage there. But
we do a little bit of fratricide.
Yeah. So, what have you come up with any idea as to why he might have flipped on this one, Adam?
No idea. I mean, I just imagine maybe, I don't know, maybe he used to be based out of London, and he sort of swooped in there thinking he could run with the same platitudes, and maybe he's found himself up against a bit of a wall and he's decided to change tact. But
yeah, you'd think the Church of England would be a little bit more based in York than it would have been in London, at least, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen this new plan? It's not that new, but by Welby, he wants to. I think he wants to build 30,000 churches in the UK or something.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll
when they're
literally,
they're you know, the number of churches is declining. There's no there's no
But
substantial number being built. I think he thinks he can like mass convert like lefties in the cities.
And is this the Church of England bloke?
Yeah, it's the Archbishop of Canterbury, this one.
Oh, bloody hell. Okay, fair enough. Well, I don't know. I guess we'll put that down to crazy Archbishop of Canterbury ideas. I just don't see it happening. I mean, and could they even afford it?
Well, well, this is the thing. I think his plan is he wants to make the road to sort of priesthood much cheaper, and instead of them investing and giving up and coming vicars proper theological degrees, they want to just essentially give them, sort of a weekend woke course, I suppose, or something sort of vaguely along those lines.
And I suppose half of them would be women, so
yeah, probably. It's going to be what do you call it, bio-Leninism to the max, isn't it?
Yeah. Let me just say to Eva Doberman here, COV is cocked as fuck. Yeah, it is. But I mean, I got married in a high Church of England church in the Shires, and my son was also baptized there. So bits of it are not as cocked as some other bits. It's not all one thing. There are.
But that doesn't mean you should give up on it either. I mean,
it's
everyone
English
on the
church.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone on the Christian right is always talking about how like these are challenges. And then when their own church starts to get cucked, they run away. Not run away. Some of them have legitimate reasons to change, but
well, I mean, look, I'm no expert on Roman Catholicism, although my mother was a Roman Catholic. But I would say that some of the recent pronouncements of the current Pope against the Latin Mass are not exactly uncucked. if you see what I'm saying.
Mm.
I certainly know Roman Catholics who I respect who are very unhappy about this and see it as an attack on the right wing of the Catholic Church. So it's it's not just the C of E; it's all of the Christian churches are in a very similar boat.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Ozzy is a Orthodox, aren't you, Ozzy?
Yeah.
Is the Orthodox holding up better against this stuff? Maybe.
We are. At least I would say. It's not the reason I joined. I didn't join the Orthodox Church because of posing. I joined it for other reasons, but very personal reasons. But I would say one of the things that, like, I mean, this is the first I've heard of attempting to build new churches. While that immediately made me think of Putin building Orthodox churches in Russia.
Mm.
And the thing is, and the funny thing is that the Orthodox Church isn't even like an institutionalized church within the Russian state. It's just that Putin is an Orthodox Christian, so he decides to do it.
Oh, is he?
In the Church of England, at least for England in particular, Church of, it is the established church of the nation. So the government could technically go and build a load of Church of England churches, should it wish, from its own fund.
I mean, I wish it would, rather than building mosques all the time. But I mean,
Yeah, but it's like there's a Catholic priest who I like to listen to called Father Mark Goring, and he made this point about the royal family, actually, because like you have at the very, very top of society a bunch of apolitical yet religiously committed people. Why don't they spend a lot of time promoting the faith? And I mean, I think this is just possibly another one of those examples of like a possibility to righteously expound a true faith, as opposed to creating what on earth the Archbishop of Canterbury wants to create. I do not trust Welby as far as I could throw him. So
ditto.
Yeah. But yeah, I try and avoid issues of Anglican nature because I'm no longer in that church. I was originally in the Scottish Episcopalian Church, and I just converted for my own personal reasons. But as far as I'm concerned, like there is a missed opportunity within the Anglican Church to go very, very Bible thumpy, to be honest. But hey, that's another thing.
I don't know. Look, what I get about the Church of England these days is kind of when I see stuff that Peter Hitchens comes out with, etc. Because Peter Hitchens is a supporter of the old-fashioned High Church of England with the Book of Common Prayer and all that kind of stuff. And I also I know people like yourself who are Orthodox, and you're not the only one I know. And then again, I know some pretty base Catholics, and because I'm an agnostic, I'm a don't know in terms of Christianity. I can see good things about all of these subsections of Christianity, and I just think we have so many enemies these days that stuff can't just divide us. We have a lot more. We have a lot more in common than we have against each other, in my opinion.
Did you know that Welby was some form of executive in an oil company before he became?
What a surprise!
Yeah.
Before he became the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Well, I don't know what his actual path through the church was, but before he went to work, in the church formally.
Well, I can tell you that, like, I knew a vicar when I was a young chap, a very young chap, teenager, like in the 70s, and he had been born in India, and had like been in the army. He'd worked for Kodak's, the camera company, the film company, and before he became a vicar, and eventually they gave him one of these Waterloo churches in London, and they're very big churches. and they were built. And the reason they're called Waterloo churches is that the bells were cast from French cannon captured at Waterloo in 1815. And he was telling me, even in his day, he had this enormous church which he couldn't even a quarter fill at Christmas, but he was a really nice chap. And then the vicar who married me, who, as I say, was a high Church of England chap, he was like getting on towards Anglo-Catholic, I guess you'd say. He was a former RAF bloke who used to fly Shackletons, maritime reconnaissance aircraft. And I kind of like these guys because they had life experience, which wasn't just a church. And they were good chaps. They were absolutely good men. I mean, Christian in the real sense, insofar as I could see anyway. So I just think, most Christians have more in common than they have against each other. And we can't afford these divisions these days in terms of because you're X religion and I'm Y religion, I won't agree with anything you say, because that's just craziness now. We've just got too many enemies, internal ones as well as external ones. But that's just my own opinion.
Yeah, I'm just going to post something in chat. It's a link to an Unheard article, and in that they describe Operation Myriad, I think it's called, which is to build 10,000 Church of England churches, not 30,000.
Well, if you put it in I don't know, can you post it directly in the chat? Because if you can't,
because I've got a spammer.
Yeah, you should be able to.
But yeah, I mean, I often I get some of the animosity, because churches are always trying to obviously one up themselves and or one up each other, I should say. And so I get the apprehension of Catholics to open up to Protestants and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, there is a room for a literal broad church at the moment.
Yeah, and
because
I also
we are, after all, the underdogs on the losing side.
We are, and also even within the individual Catholic church, the individual Christian churches, people who are traditionalists or reactionaries or on the right are very much the minority in all of those churches now. So I mean, even more the guys on the right should say, okay, we disagree on this or that theological thing, but that doesn't mean we can't agree on a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm going to say is Anglicanism still has a form of apostolic succession, so it's still significantly more valid than other forms of Protestantism.
Well, look, I'm certainly not going to go against the Church of England, because it is the national church, and Her Majesty the Queen is the head of it. So I mean, I'm not going to go against that.
Yeah, but then you've also got Prince Charles apparently wants to change the title when he gets in to from Defender of the Faith to Defender of Faiths.
There is a reason.
That would never surprise me.
He is. There is a possible rumor, I don't know if it's true, that he might be a member of the Orthodox Church secretly.
Ooh.
Really?
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, but
that would be highly subversive.
It would be highly subversive, and I actually do not support that from my monarch. I think my monarch should always be supporting the church that they are in charge of, because logically you can't say, actually, don't listen to my project, you should go join another person's project. It doesn't really make sense in syntax.
See, the thing is, I did consider joining the Orthodox Church quite a few years ago, and it did kind of come up to my mind that Alfred the Great was technically a member of the Orthodox Church, and other such things. So
can I just ask Ozzy? Ozzy, you're our Scotsman on the panel this evening.
Yeah.
I've just put up a thing from the chat, and Eva Doberman is saying sectarian violence in Scotland is daily. Your knife problems pales in comparison to up here, chaps. I don't believe that, unless it's vastly changed when I was in Scotland. I mean, yes, there was sectarian stuff in Glasgow for sure. But
this is the thing. The first thing I was going to say is I don't live in Glasgow.
yeah,
I live in I live in a more rural area. There are still issues with sectarianism. I'm not going to deny that, but I wouldn't say they were what they were during the Troubles. I mean, the other thing I would say is that actually one of the Scotland's speech laws are possibly quite paused because we have an early experience of sectarian divides. So, for example, if you start talking about sectarian stuff on a train, you can get 6 months in prison.
Wow. Speech.
Yeah, and that law has existed since I was very small. So, like, I'm not. I wouldn't say it's absolutely ginormous, but it does definitely exist. It's just I wouldn't say it can. I wouldn't, and I mean Glasgow is still definitely very, very dangerous. It is right next to London. I don't know the exact numbers. I think per capita, I think London did overtake Glasgow, but I could be wrong there. I mean,
look, I've said before, like I've spent quite a lot of time up in Stirling, which is in between Edinburgh and Glasgow. For anyone who's not a Scot, and I used to visit Glasgow pretty often and Edinburgh pretty often, and actually I liked Glasgow as a town, I have to say, but partly because my father, his military mates were mostly Glaswegians or Geordies, so and I can understand broad Glaswegian, which most Sassenachs can't. So, but I certainly remember in the early 80s when I had a girl up in Scotland. Yes, there was lots of sectarian graffiti around in Glasgow, and there were certain areas of Glasgow which were loyalists and certain areas which most certainly weren't. And even in Stirling, you would get some issues with Orange Day parades and stuff like this, although it was not usually violent. It was usually, there was a bit of shouting, but that was about it. But I'd be amazed if it's like all that terrible now. I mean, maybe
there are a few other things to say about this. So, I mean, the first one that sprung to mind is to do with a friend of mine who we used to go to school with, and he's a proper Glaswegian fellow. Yeah. He's as tubby as you'd expect for a Glaswegian as well, but I shouldn't have said that. But
all depended if he could give you a Glasgow kiss.
But he relayed to me a very interesting anecdote once when we were both pretty young in the school, and he said one day he was playing in the sandpit, and he and his friends accidentally dug up 2 skeletons, and. So presumably what must have happened is that a few years ago, someone had killed some people, dug up the sandpit, put these guys in and ran off. But that was quite interesting. The other thing I would say is that it's not necessarily violence related, but politically related. During Indie Ref, by and large, if you were Church of Scotland or the Episcopal Church, you voted no. And if you were Catholic or atheist / agnostic, you would vote to leave. You were a yes voter. Also, if you had an Irish descendant parents, but I know you find that uncomfortable, G. So
yeah, no, I'm not uncomfortable with that. I'm well aware of it. I just don't want it to let people understand who are watching this from the outside. I have 1 or 2 loyalist Irish people in my Discord, and I don't want open warfare in my Discord, so I try and clamp down on this a bit. But I'm quite aware of what actually is going on, you know.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all I can really say about sectarian violence. I mean, of course, I'm quite I'm quite young, as I mean, most of the sectarian troubles you've had in the UK in general happened before I was born. The Good Friday Agreement was signed 3 years before I was born. So my point of view is slightly skewed in that respect. But
yeah, I mean, mine's skewed because I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland with the British Army, and my mother was an Irish Catholic. But I mean, there you go. So, but such is life, I guess. All right, Ozzy. Was there anything you wanted to bring up to start us off with? I'm sorry with that big digression that we did there.
No, not at all. I mean, is there anything I want to say? I mean, I probably blurted out what I wanted to say a lot last night. But apart from that, I don't. There's nothing that immediately grips my mind.
If you wanted to go on about that stuff that AA was talking about a kind of traditionalist reactionary settlement somewhere, then by all means, you're quite welcome to talk about that.
Okay, so for those who don't know, AA made a video about what he called a positive vision for the right, in which he basically describes what he would want the ideal right-wing polity, I guess you could call it, to look like. And in his understanding, it would not be a large agglomeration of settlements. It would simply be a small confederation of like 2 or 3 towns. He had a follow-up stream which I listened to, in which he clarified that the population size together would be around 30,000 people. And it's actually quite an interesting video. And the thing is that he got a really, really bad rap, mainly from Ralph, who I have associations with. But what he was trying to do was he's basically trying to convey that like we need to start moving towards, or like have a goal in mind that we want to live on smaller scale societies with limits to things like technology and limits to communication with the outside world, certain economic controls and all that. It was sort of a feudalistic thing. It's not too far from something G.K. Chesterton would have imagined. And it got me thinking, and I don't think it's entirely achievable. And I have some very and there are some things about it that I still haven't completely thought through yet. But I don't think the image is entirely unrealistic. But there needs to be some clarifications around that. I do not think that we will achieve this sort of vision within the next 10, 20, or even 50 years. But in the long term, as I foresee it, I think government's infrastructure is going to slowly start breaking down. And that's to do with some calculation issues and things related to how information is processed. But in terms of the actual vision, I actually do not think we should be saying this is ridiculous, because as he says, it's something you should be acting towards. But I'm not ever going to really do it justice, because one, I have 2 or 3 minutes to relay this in, and more importantly, I'm not AA, and so I cannot give a fully articulated version of this. But yeah, so that's my start.
You have as long as you want, mate. I mean, we don't have limits on how long someone's talking yet. So
I know, but it is Iron Duke stream, and there are 2 other people, and I could go on forever, and I could possibly make everyone leave. So,
well, I've got something to say about that, but before I do, Alan, what's your opinion on this stuff? I presume you've seen the AA stream, have you?
Yeah, I watched the video, the stream. I watched Ralph's reaction. I thought Ralph was a little harsh, but I don't necessarily think a lot of his criticisms were completely wrong. Although a large part of me does really like AA's vision, just because it kind of ticks all those boxes of wanting to just become an Amish and run off somewhere and live on a farm. But I mean, I think I said in Discord, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this to this place, and it's not necessarily that I'm going to go and transform stuff, but I'm going to. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to make a particular community I'm living in more inward looking and more sustainable within itself, and nothing more. And then it will just be that probably long after I'm dead, hopefully that there is some groundwork still remaining for it to be turned into something when the shit hits the fan. I'm not banking on any sort of large societal collapse. Although I will point out one of the strengths to I think AA's plan that I didn't when I was listening to Ralph, that I didn't immediately sort of see, but when I was listening to Ralph's criticisms, kind of that I started to think about was that I think the whole no communication technology is actually a really. At first I thought I don't think that's particularly necessary. I think there's other things you could do, but now looking back, I think that's quite a big key part because I mean Ralph was talking. I hope I'm getting him right. I think Ralph was also talking about the fact that you couldn't do that because the way the British society is set up right now, they would shut that down so damn fast. And I get what he's saying, but I also think that a large part of the modern British state is built up so heavily on tech and so heavily on the tracking of human movement through communication technology that when you cut that out, you do to a large part gain the ability to act kind of on their blind side within reason, within a certain time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I could be completely wrong about that.
Listen, I think that's the least, well, not the least, it's one of the least realistic aspects of AA's idea is that you're not going to have any modern electronic technology. I just don't think that's going to work. But I mean, that's just me, and I could easily be wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
AA wouldn't be able to live there for a start because he couldn't sell his courses, could he?
Yeah, I mean, I know I myself would be in a lot of trouble, at least in a non-technical society, because almost the entirety of my CV is technical skills. So I'd be kind of stuffed. I remember once someone asked me, I don't know, it was on Twitter actually. It was like, "What would your profession be in the medieval world?" And like, I know a bit of Latin and Greek, so hopefully I could get myself in as a court scribe, but that's about it. I'm not exactly going to be something.
You could be some sort of historian, translator type person, I guess.
I would have to be able to read and write with other scholars, and I don't really know much. I mean, I could. I possibly have possible. I mean, I don't know what modern Scots sounds like relative to Middle and Early Scots. I suppose it sounds more like Old English, isn't it? I'm not very good with Old English, you see. So, but yeah.
Listen. I was talking yesterday I was on just before I went out last night. I was on this chat stream who I'm just putting in the chat. There's a link to his stream. This is a bloke called Jonathan Holl, who's an American academic chap who's lived around the world. He's lived in Africa, etc. But he's also now he's a white chap, by the way, and actually originally of German descent, I believe. And he's now in what used to be Soviet Central Asia, which is now one of these independent republics. And I was talking to him about exactly this stuff on the stream. You can go and watch his last stream, and after he's going about 50 minutes, I come on the stream for half an hour or so. And I was actually asking him about this stuff, and he was telling me that the Amish are an offshoot of the Mennonites, which look, this is all religious gobbledygook to me to some extent, but apparently the Amish are an offshoot of the Mennonites. And of course, many people, in fact, were comparing AA's idea to the Amish, in America. These guys who still ride around in horse buggies and this kind of stuff. And one of the things that Jonathan Pohl was saying was that those guys had quite a lot of territory in Russia under the Tsars. And for a while, when the communists took over, they were able to negotiate keeping some of this land, sort of thing. But when it didn't suit them, they were wiped out and moved really, really quickly because they didn't have a military to defend themselves. And I know Ozzy will recall that when we were discussing this on the Discord last week, like one of my major problems with any of this is that if you set it up in a nation on sufferance, you're there on sufferance. And as soon as people don't like you, they'll close you down.
Well, I mean, this is sorry, you carry on.
Yeah. So one of the things that a lot of this conversation will inevitably be heavily contextual on NRX thought, and the reason for that is because my original idea of this came from thinking about AA stream and some earlier thoughts I've had on, embarrassingly enough, computer science. And one of the things I've been thinking is that we are developing systems that are so complex. And by that, I mean, you as an individual not only communicate with, say, your mother, your father, your friends, etc., but you also communicate with them through multiple dimensions. You communicate with them through your body language, you communicate them through words, you communicate through actions, and you also communicate through Twitter, Facebook, etc. And these nodes grow all the time. And there is this concept within computer science in which basically you say there is no way that anything could ever calculate this in enough time as to effectively police this. And what I'm starting to see is that as our populations are growing and as there is simply more information going around, large governments controlling large amounts of people will slowly start becoming impossible.
I do see your point, and I think there is some degree of truth in what you're saying, for sure. Let me just answer Puffwagon in the chat here, whose thing I've just put up on the screen. Puffwagon says Jonathan Pohl was a lecturer in Kurdistan. I think he still is, but he's moving to a new university soon. And he streamed with Luke Ford and KMG. I don't know who KMG is. I do know who Luke Ford is. But he's also streamed with Semiagog a couple of times. And I believe tomorrow he's streaming with Andy Nowicki, who's a good guy from the Affirmative Right website. So, and he's a very intelligent bloke. And like, if you want to know what happened to Germans in the Soviet Union, and there were a lot of Germans who were living in the Soviet Union because they'd moved there during the Tsarist period. If you want to know what happened to Germans in the Soviet Union during and after World War II, Jonathan Pohl's one of the blokes who can tell you a lot about that stuff. So that's what I have to say to that, Puffwagon. Also, please, Puffwagon and John McNamara, calm down a bit in the chat, eh? Who is Pohl? Mr. X. If you go up to my last thing in the chat, you'll find a link to his channel. But you can also, just go on YouTube and put in Jonathan Pohl and you'll find him. So there's that. Good morning, Lady of Shalott. Nice to see you here again. My view with this stuff is that, we can do it under sufferance in various countries, but it is under sufferance. And like, there is no way for even a small town surrounded by a few villages to build up a decent defense force. I just don't think it's possible.
Right, but that's the thing that comes last, because you were saying a minute ago about various groups in Russia that got screwed over by the Bolsheviks.
Yep.
But this is the story of the Cossacks, and they did have a large army. They were heavily militarized. They were all
fighting men. Yeah, absolutely.
And they got wiped out first. In fact, I mean, the Bolsheviks had a name for this. It was de-Cossacization. They went after them specifically because they posed the biggest threat. Yeah, and that's kind of why the militarization thing comes at the absolute end.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Adam. But I mean, even like as again, this I don't know much about this in Russia. I'm going on what Mr. Pol told me, and but apparently, some of these Amish types did actually eventually come up with like self-defense forces, at least against bandits and things like this. Even though these people were very anti-violence and then very anti-warfare. But that did them no good either. My point is that, like, to survive, if we ever get to this civilizational breakdown thing, that I think everyone is agreed we're heading towards for sure. When it really takes hold, if you can't defend yourself, you're not going to survive. And it won't really matter what your ideology is or anything else. Like I think you've got to look at kind of a situation like England in Alfred the Great's time, during the Norse invasions and what have you, but with automatic weapons because they're not going to go away,
Yeah.
And I just think like we're between a rock and a hard place in that sense.
Yeah. John McNamara in chat said, "Didn't the British government hand over the captured Cossacks and their families that fought with the Germans in World War II over to the Soviets?"
Sadly, yes, they did.
Yeah. The White Army sided with the Nazis because the Nazis offered them a plot of land, and a chance to start anew. And when they realised the Germans were losing, is it Lens in Austria where the Cossacks went to?
They went into Austria, yes, they did.
Yeah.
And one of the few things I'm ashamed of utterly that the British did in World War II was that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I'm really ashamed of that. I don't think Britain should have done that. I think it was appalling. Because by that stage, the people who ran Britain knew what Stalin was like, even though the ordinary British people didn't. They still thought he was Uncle Joe.
As well.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was America was the one that wanted Soviet help. We didn't know them shit.
Yeah, and I mean, also, again, constantly forgotten, especially by the Nazi tards and the Nazi larpers, is that, that there was such a thing as the Ribbentrop Molotov Pact. There was the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Basically, from 1939 until 1941, Stalin and Hitler were allies. They jointly invaded Poland. Hitler was happy to let the Russians take over all the Baltic states, etc. These were not good guys, either of them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't like Hitler at all, but I sure don't like Stalin. But if you want to say something that makes me ashamed, is the Brits handing over those poor fucking white Russians at the end of the war to the Soviets. That makes me ashamed. It's one of the very few things that Britain has done that does make me ashamed.
One of the other things that I was thinking of was that I was thinking back to some sources I did about Churchill for my A-level, in which, and one of them, he had a sit down with Stalin. I can't remember if this was the conference in 1943 or in 1945, the Yalta one being the 1945 one. But he basically goes up to Stalin and is like, regarding Eastern Europe, I propose that you have 90% influence in Romania, 80% influence in Hungary, and that they do it all on a sheet. And you pick it. And not one administration was asked. It was just like, yeah, we're just going to do that.
And the only bit Churchill was able to really keep up was he stopped Greece being taken over by the commies, and that was about it. Because there were enough British troops in Greece at the end of the war to stop that, but that was about it, to be honest. And I suppose to some degree Austria, but I mean, that's about it, really.
Yeah, but I think that's just.
We shouldn't have given so many armaments to the Soviets. We should have let Germany lose against them, but ground the Soviet Union down to
they should have killed each other in the far north of Siberia somewhere. I wouldn't have sent Russia so much as a second-hand pair of British Army boots in World War II. All of that stuff that Churchill sent through Arctic convoys, which cost the Merchant Navy and the Royal Navy loads and loads of brave men. I would have sent all that stuff to the Far East so that when the Japanese tried shit, they wouldn't have won there either. But there we go. That was me, not Churchill.
Yeah, but the only problem you got then is that if it had been a straight slog between the Soviet Union and Germany, Germany would have won.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true, Alan, because Russia had so much land to trade for time. It's such an enormous country that, like, they could have just kept retreating. You know, Napoleon captured Moscow. Much good did it do him, you know?
Yeah, but I would also point out that the Napoleon situation, and the same for when the Poles did it, was very different.
Well, it was.
I mean, they were willing to torch their own cities to best Napoleon.
Yes, they were, and they did the same thing in World War II. They did the scorched earth policy in front of the Germans. And there's no reason to believe that Stalin would have stayed in Moscow and died like Hitler did in bloody Berlin. I don't think he would have done. He would have just retreated beyond the Ural Mountains.
Yeah, but the thing with once you go beyond the Urals is the infrastructure gets so thin on the ground that it actually even running an army becomes impossible.
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, but I just still don't think there was any real way for Germany to win.
Mm.
I mean, like the line that the Germans were aiming for, which, you know, spoiler alert, they never reached, but the line, the Archangel Astrakhan line they were trying to reach was just an arbitrary line. I mean, it didn't even have any like rivers or mountains or any natural features to make any sense, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the whole thing, Hitler's idea of being the Soviet Union would only have worked if his original idea that, you know, we kick in the door and it all comes tumbling down had been true, which it wasn't.
The other possibility is that he got the oil fields, and essentially Russia wouldn't have been able to continue the war. But that's a big stretch. And
assumes the Americans are not going to supply them as they did via the Pacific. Exactly.
Yes, but the thing is that once if Germany did get control of the oil supplies in Baku, then the Americans, to ship their oil, would have to go to Vladivostok, take the Trans-Siberian Railway all the way over to the Soviet front, and then use the oil. And of course, things changed by then. And of course, if Germany had Moscow by then the ability to distribute the materials would be really haywire. But even then, all I would posit was that, like, there's this good guy. I mean, YouTube is not my forte. Not YouTube. History is not my forte. It's not what I read papers about. But one channel that I do quite like is Tik. That's Tik.
Yeah, he's pretty good. Yeah, he is pretty good.
And he does.
I don't always agree with him, but he is pretty good.
I would try and ignore his politics because he clearly decided he's going to learn political theory, picked up Rothbard first, and went on a completely the wrong direction. But his actual historiography is pretty good.
Yeah.
If people are interested in the Eastern Front in particular, he's pretty good on that. But insofar as I'm not entirely sure how we got here. But insofar as I'm concerned, Germany, in most circumstances, could not have won the war.
No. Yeah. I agree. I mean, like, even if they had got a hold of all those caucuses, oil fields, they would have still been at a huge disadvantage. I mean, without them, the Germans had no chance whatever. But even with them, I still don't think they would have won. You know, if you're going to take on the largest country in the world, the richest country in the world, the biggest empire of the world at the same time, you're a bit dumb in my opinion, but that's just me.
Yeah. I mean, either way, it's kind of it's a bit of a calculation problem, isn't it? For Germany, and yes. So of course, there are things they can do to They could never have taken out Russia completely. They would always have them as a nuisance on the border, and they'd probably have partisans being a complete, pain in the ass for.
Absolutely right. I agree with that totally.
Because you cannot have a plan to wipe out, like, what when their plan's something like to kill 80, 90 million people, that's not going to happen, and people are just going to go, all right, okay, fine.
I will just say what Steve. I've just put this up from the chat. There is some evidence. It's not conclusive, but there is a fair bit of evidence actually that the Soviets at various stages did consider asking for a separate peace with Germany. That's certainly true.
Yeah,
there is quite a lot of evidence of that at different stages. And had the Russians not had US and British aid, they would have had a hard time, particularly because of US food and American trucks, which were the two biggest deals.
Yeah, they didn't really like our weapons. They complained quite a lot about British tanks.
Yeah, but they used them. They used
them because they didn't really have a choice.
Yeah, and there were dumps of Hurricanes and Spitfires in Russia that the Russians hadn't bothered using when British pilots and Australian pilots in Singapore were still flying ancient American Brewster Buffaloes.
Yeah.
And had they been sent down there, who knows? Different things might have happened.
I'll have to find it, but there's a professor in Finland who has studied war supplies to the Soviet Union quite extensively, and he basically deposits that or supposes that the Soviet Union couldn't have won the war at all without aid from the West.
Yeah, I think there's a good argument about that.
Mm.
And I mean, everyone goes on about the Russians lost enormous numbers of casualties. They did, but their army wasn't very good at the start, partly because Stalin had killed off most of their best officers.
Yeah, and you also have to remember that for only one of those years were they defending, and then again, it wasn't a very good defense. And for the rest of the time, they were doing multiple different forms of offensive. Even as early as 1942, you had the Reserve Meat Grinder and Operation Uranus.
Yeah. Didn't they choose their names for their operations?
Operation York. Yeah, I know. It's kind of an unfortunate name, but
yeah.
I'm sure it sounded cool in your heads, but a simple pirate in chat said, American here, Soviets didn't win without commie FDR helping out Stalin. Well, I mean, you can go back even further and go to like Woodrow Wilson. I mean, that prick allowed the Bolshevik experiment to continue. I mean, he could have stopped it dead right there and then, but...
I know, as I often say in the chat on AA streams, although I'm always ignored, one of the first people into the Soviet Union from America was Henry Ford, who AA is so fond of, for reasons I don't entirely understand, but there you go.
For reasons we do really understand. Yeah, it is an oddball.
But I don't know. We wandered a long way away from what we started off with, which was traditional communities. I do see a lot of people on the right who I like, people like the distributists, etc., suggesting that that's the only way we can go now. I absolutely agree with what Ammon and Ozzy were saying earlier, that we should try and do this on a very local level. But I don't think it's going to be enough on its own. I really don't. I think without a nation state, when things really break down, you're going to be run over by whatever is out there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about this was that essentially is because it's actually, funny enough, relates to what we were talking about last night about Pictish confederations. If you have these small little polities dotted around the place, if they are geographically relatively close to each other, what you could basically have is a confederacy, if you will.
Yeah.
And it is not, and I mean, this is basically how the idea of kingship evolved. You basically have a series of tribes that agree to work together in the case of outside hostility, and the leader.
You're really talking about ancient Greece when the Persians invaded, aren't you?
Yes, but I'm also talking about things like old tanistry in Celtic tribes, and the idea that there is a leader who will protect you against foreign affairs. I mean, it's all possibly a bit archaic for the modern era, and the exact nuances of this I can't be too sure on. But I think the general response is that if you have a big threat from the outside, you'd be expected to make a friendship with other polities of your size to counter it.
Yeah, you see, this is my problem with this, is that, like, even if, like, say you've got a small town, say, surrounded by, I don't know, 36 villages. Let's say you've got 3 small towns surrounded by 90 villages, and all of you guys are in some sort of a confederation for defense purposes. This is not going to work against anything like a nation state attacking you.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that AA said that kind of made me smirk a bit was, he was like, okay, so we're obviously going to need a defense. So why don't we just get some missile launchers from the Middle East?
Yeah, I know.
And like,
I saw that.
And like, my first thought on that was, like, the technology those missile launchers use is actually incredibly complex, because you basically have to give.
What sort of missile launchers was he talking about?
I think he's talking about surface-to-air missiles. And
what? Fine. So you can shoot down some of the enemy air force. What are you going to do about their ground forces and their tanks?
Yeah, but like, even then, like, so if you have access to this technology, that means you also have to be able to use radios. It also means you have to program an AI which has computer vision.
Yeah, you've got to have computers. Absolutely have to have computers. Yeah.
And
people who can use computers, which is going to be difficult if your society, like, isn't allowed electronics.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would qualify about this, though, is that there is a realistic way of these sorts of things developing without any government sending in the troops. And the way this would happen is basically, it's related to what I was thinking about earlier, and I've started writing a doc about, although it's nowhere near completed. And it's basically, a government will not a government of this size with such a large population will not effectively be able to police everything. And so it's going to start losing grips on certain places that it will consider less reliable. So it's perhaps not the most straightforward thing to think about in the UK, but if you think about something like the United States, and I'm only using it as an example, you could have certain states which are basically like, well, I'm going to call, well, you know, the government's like, we've got 100,000 refugees and we need to spread it across some of the states. And then some of these states basically start saying, actually, we're not going to take them in. And, you know, the government could say, well, why not? And he's like, well, we don't really have the space for them. Or, you know, they can make up any one excuse. And the government can either has a choice then. It has to launch an investigation and then see, okay, should we send in the troops? Or it can just move on. And I have a suspicion that there's going to be a whole lot more moving on and a whole lot less investigation, send boots on the ground as time goes on. And this will also be happening in the UK, I expect. And so as time goes on, you can just get little tidbits in areas which are basically just stop listening to the government, at least for really big issues. And then it might become smaller issues. And then slowly you've basically got de facto autonomous regions.
Adam, and what do you think about that one, mate?
Well, I largely agree, actually. Don't we already see some of this to a very minor extent with some of these small towns in Yorkshire where they've become like over 90% Muslim, and they just hold Sharia courts and the government can't really do anything about it?
Yeah, but but hang on. How much of that is the government can't do anything about it, and how much of it is they don't want to?
Well, don't want to and
exactly.
can't is basically the same thing in the political machine, though, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure, you see, because I reckon if you had little Yorkshire towns that were becoming reactionary traditionalist, I think the government would do something about that. And they'd be talking about hate groups, and they'd be talking about white supremacy groups.
Yeah, but that's also because like the whites aren't mobilized as a solid group. Whereas like I mean the MOD themselves have said that the rising Muslim population in Britain is gonna lead to a point probably in the next 5 to 10 years where they just won't be able to go to war in certain parts of the world.
Yeah,
because of the unrest it would cause back home.
And I mean, the other thing I would bring up is that these autonomous regions, like for the government to stop that from happening, they would have to increase the amount of police really to quite a large degree. They would have to bring the police from somewhere else because I don't think you're going to get many police recruits in that town. And then they would have to send them on patrols continuously and pay for everything, and keep investigating and making sure that certain imams aren't holding Sharia courts, etc., etc., etc. It slowly becomes a problem of such immense proportion. And so my actual default thought is that, well, okay, so maybe it starts in a few places originally, and maybe they just get shut down by the government because the government's like, well, we can't have that. But as government control just starts slipping and just slowly, it's not that it will just like, it's not that people just say, actually, you know what, I'm going to go kill someone today. It's more just sort of like slowly caring less about the bureaucracy, the government not being able to send in police because either they can't pay them or there's simply not enough people joining. And eventually what you would basically see is just areas that are self-controlled. And it's not, and you know, this will not necessarily mean that like they say we're independent from the UK. It would almost be a bit like the 13 colonies in the United States. It's just sort of like, yeah, we're kind of related to Westminster, but we're not Britain exactly. We're British, but we're not like part of the Westminster system.
Yeah, I don't know, guys. I just think you're looking at a very small window between when things get worse than they are now and when things totally break down.
So, yeah, this is a very, I mean, this is kind of an abstract way of seeing it, and of course, it's a long while in the future. But I think there's precedent.
I don't think it is a long way in the future, actually, man. I think it's much quicker than people think it's going to be.
Okay. So I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago I said that, you know, the big number we're thinking about is in 2066. It's probably something like 2045.
But you're talking about 2030 or something around there, or 2035, when I think the whole thing's going to start breaking down. But
yes,
but then you're looking at maybe another 15, 20, 25 years before the whole thing is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this entire process will be very drawn out, and
but not really. It'll be quick. It's a bit like if you look at the end of the Roman Empire. When we look back on it now, we think, oh, that was really quick. But for the people involved, it probably wasn't.
Well, it was and it wasn't, because, you know, the empire was losing direct control over certain provinces for a long time. And, you know, the legions were continually starting to leave the frontier. I think the reason that the Roman Empire is actually a pretty apt description of this is because it doesn't. You don't really notice. I mean, the official reason why we think 476 is the end of the Roman Empire is because
emperor.
it was because the imperial Senate didn't crown a new emperor. They just said, okay, it's the Eastern Roman Emperor now.
Yeah,
and that's just where. And so from de facto, that the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist because it was recognized as part of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is a very and that's all very constitutional and vague.
But don't forget, Theodosius took most of it back, not all of it, but most of it from the east.
You mean Justinian?
Yeah, I think Justinian. I think you're right. Yeah, but he took most of it back.
He did, but like. One that was only temporary, and the way the West was reconquered was not in a traditional Roman civilizational style. It basically involved Justinian's general, who's
Belisarius.
Belisarius, that's it.
Yeah.
Basically running from place to place. Dabbing on barbarians, with relatively limited amounts of soldiers,
but the point I'm trying to make here, like as a historian, is that we look back on this and we see something happened between, say, 450 and 485, and we think that's really quick, but it isn't. It's 35 years. It's at least a third of someone's life.
Sure, but okay. So again, this is a matter of perspective, but like, for us, I still think it will noticeably be more drawn out than I think it is, because like my sort of, I don't see things very apocalyptically.
I know you don't, and I don't totally agree with you on that. But yeah, fair enough.
There's this very famous image, if you look up the fall of the Western Roman Empire, of one of the gladiators standing on top, and like there's this fire in the background, and barbarians are chopping people and they're raping, and everything's on fire. It's complete chaos, and that's referring to the sack of Rome. But the sack of Rome happened 75 years before the fall of Rome. Or something like that.
Yeah, I know.
My suspicion is that like people will just stop caring, and the government's going to stop caring, and we're not going to have.
I think they long ago stopped caring about the indigenous British population, but that's just me.
Yeah. So you're saying the West will end up like Afghanistan at best. I don't know what the West is going to end up like. I
didn't say anything about Afghanistan, but okay, if you say so.
Yeah, like I've put forward that like we could possibly see, I don't think government on this sort of size is sustainable, and in fact I think it's part of the reason empires fall, at least now that I've started really thinking about it.
Hang on, let me just say one thing before you go on further, Ozzy, is that one of the things Jonathan Pole said to me, which was very, very sensible, was that the handover between the British and the Americans in 1945 or say, actually, you could probably say 1942 to 1948, was relatively amicable and was between two fairly similar cultures. We haven't had what's going to happen to us since the end of the Roman Empire, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Where there's going to be a total change. Look, it could be that China will totally take over. It could be we'll just be in for a long period of anarchy. But it's not going to be like what happened around the Second World War and after it at all.
Well, China's going to decline with the West, though, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Yes, I think it will. I hope
it will, but I don't know if that's true.
I think
with us.
I can't stand the Chinese Communist Party, and I'm not very fond of the Chinese as a whole, to be honest. But that's just me.
The thing you should probably remember is that China industrialized about 100 years later than us.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
And so what you could say is that
actually more like 150 years, but okay.
Yeah, but like what you could say is that from that perspective, they are a century and a bit behind us in terms of societal complexity. That might not exactly be true because, of course, they now have social media in China and they have a lot of information transfer. But so maybe it's 30 or 40 years later. I don't know. It's very speculative at this point.
Yeah,
but will it look like Afghanistan though? The future would get heading towards. It's kind of like I mean, I don't know. The answer is the answer, of course, as always, is I don't know. But I think on the basis of the trends we're looking at, you might not see really tiny little villages, but you could possibly just see like a bit like how in Anglo-Saxon Britain you had a kingdom of East Anglia, a kingdom of Strathclyde.
That's what I think we're looking at in Britain, and possibly in bits of Australia. I think what you're going to look at is imagine something around the time of Alfred the Great, when the Norse invasions were happening, the Viking invasions in inverted commas. Look at that, but with automatic weapons. That's what it's going to be like, and it's going to be like that in Britain. It might be like that in Australia. It's going to be like that in America. That's what I think we're looking at. Not so much Afghanistan.
Yeah. So it's kind of difficult to say. I mean, there is a lot of moving parts as well. I can't exactly predict what the kingdoms would even look like, although I can take a reasonable guess, and I can also take a reasonable guess at what the demographic situation would look like. But one of the things,
to survive, they're going to have to get bigger. They're going to have more men. They're going to have to have more fighting men, and they're going to have more military equipment, or they just won't survive, because there's going to be just really evil, bad things out there who are just going to roll over anyone who isn't strong enough to stop it.
Yeah.
That's just the way humans are and always have been, and we will be until there's only one human left on the world.
Yeah. But, I mean, of course, the other problem with that, though, is that as you grow, I have a feeling that you will become more unstable. And, of course, America's witnessing this at the moment. It kept growing, and now it has it's now unstable. The British Empire grew up until the I think it peaked at 1923 or 4 or something.
Yeah.
And slowly afterwards.
But it didn't really, Aussie, in sheer size, yes, but in fact, it kind of lost its way during the Anglo-Boer War in 1899, 1902.
Yeah, I wouldn't split hairs over it, but the idea is that the instrument becomes too big, it cannot control everything within it. It starts developing dead weight. You can think about that in terms of the welfare system or unproductive communities.
The NHS, yeah.
Yeah. And the NHS less so, but more about the people who would use the NHS.
I'd say totally the NHS, but that's just how much money it takes.
And then you're basically going to get to the point at which the government's going to just not be able to manage all this, and it won't be able to find out all the. It's like in California, how now you can no longer be prosecuted if you shoplift up to a grand.
Yeah, no, hang on. I mean, you've got to be very careful with that stuff, because that is a choice, and it's done on purpose. Hang on. It's a choice, and it's done on purpose for a particular group of people who mostly do that.
Sure, but if they did prosecute that, then they would have to. Then the point is that they would have to throw them in jail. And actually, I do think it's also partly not a choice because it includes everyone under that bracket.
Well,
And
yeah,
so,
okay, but if you're one of those people who the police let into the building in Washington, on that, when was it, January 6th or whenever it was, and the police did let them in. There's video of them doing it. That was no insurrection, but those guys are still rotting in jail.
yeah, but I mean that's something that's already happened. One of the things that one of the things that's been happening recently is that there has been an increase in crime, and the government simply cannot prosecute it. It cannot identify the people.
Who are doing most of the crime?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's completely fucking irrelevant, mate. Completely irrelevant.
You really think so?
No, well, in terms of the, give me a second. In terms of the government maintaining order, it is completely irrelevant.
Really?
Yes.
Explain.
Because what we're not looking at a situation of we're not looking at a situation of whether it's voluntary or not. We're looking at a situation of is there autonomous groups already? And the answer is yes.
All right. All right. Let me ask you this. Hang on. We've got someone joining us. Hello, Napoleon. How are you going, mate?
All right. I'm back from my.
I never knew you were Lindsay Beige, I have to say, but there we go. Okay.
I've been hearing some.
Your accent has changed considerably, old chap. Look, let me just finish my point here. Look at the difference between the way the governments, not only in the UK but in other countries, including Germany and France and the US. Look at the huge difference in the way they treat anti-lockdown demonstrations, and Australia, by the way, because Lady of Shalott makes this point quite reasonably very often, and I agree with her. Look at the difference in the way the anti-lockdown protests are treated in Western nations compared to Black Lives Matter protests. And are you telling me there isn't one, Aussie?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay, well then explain.
Mind?
Sorry?
Are you going to change those politicians' minds?
No, I don't think I am. I'm just pointing
well, then it's
out
not really a choice, then, is it?
No, but they have a different view, is what I'm trying to say, Adam, of the one group as opposed to the other.
Here's the thing.
No, hang on, Aussie. Wait a minute, Adam. Do you see what I'm trying to say? I'm not saying that they're fair-minded because they're not. What I'm saying is, one group they are allowed to do all sorts of shit, and the other group they will go in hard on little old ladies.
But unless we can actually change their minds, which we can't, I don't think there's any point dwelling on whether it's a choice or not, because to them it's not.
All right. No, okay. I'm not. That's not what I'm saying, Adam. What I'm saying is they have made a choice about this. That's what I'm saying.
So what I would say is that the reason that one group can be effective, one group is being policed and the other one isn't, is because I expect someone in government knows that if you attempt to police one of those groups related to Minneapolis last year, you're not going to get much progress because you're just going to get more riots and stuff like that. However, the other groups, namely anti-lockdowns and their demographics, have historically been more responsive to punitive actions.
Yeah.
And for that reason, the government knows it doesn't have to completely flex all of its. Give me a second, mate.
You go on, carry on.
Right. Sorry. So what you are observing, in essence, is the government basically saying, "Well, look, we're going to burn a few, scare the rest." In one instance, because they know they can't arrest the entire lockdown parade, and it will scare people off. But the government knows that if they arrest 1,999 of the 2,000 rioters in Minneapolis, or however many it was, I don't know, those others will still keep rioting. So there you go.
So what I was trying to say when you thought I was interrupting you is that, like, one of those groups who might largely resemble us are fairly law-abiding, and the other one isn't.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought too.
So, but like, if all of a sudden this group started being, started basically saying, I don't care if I'm going to get thrown in jail. I don't care. I'm just going to do it anyway. The government might start being more cautious about applying the law. It's like if the government threw a bunch of imams. We were talking about how in Yorkshire there are default Sharia towns. Like, if the government threw a few of the imams in jail and said you can't do that anymore, the very next day there will be a Sharia court trial. I don't know who would run it, but there would be one.
Yeah.
You could not easily say the same thing for a party in the street regarding COVID regulations.
And yet somehow our people who won't stand up at all, hardly, with some good exceptions, are suddenly going to set up these independent places. I just don't see it, mate. I wish I did, but I don't see it.
That is a contingent point, but I think it's possible that more dissent will grow over time.
All right, fair enough. Let's move on a little bit. I'm going to ask Napoleon if he's got anything he wants to bring up.
Yeah, I came on quite late, so I don't know what the topic is.
Thanks, Napoleon, for the charming PFP.
I was waiting to see how long you notice.
Anyway, incidentally, for people in the chat, we now have 2 Scotsmen on the stream. But anyway,
I can change that.
No, you don't need to. So you haven't got anything you want to bring up as the first thing?
Not really. I'll kind of give my opinion as we go along.
All right, fair enough. Alaman, you haven't said much for a while. What do you think about all this shit, man?
No, I'm just enjoying the show, to be honest. I broadly agree with, I think, Ozzy on this one.
But how do you think we're going to get our people to suddenly become much harder than they have been for a very long time?
Well, black pilling time. We don't. It's probably hopeless. No, more seriously. I think there's one of the things that's kind of been a bit funny. I mean, I think Bowden brought this up a lot, and they were like, well, people are going to wake up. They're going to go for they're going to start talking about like rights for whites, as it were. You are actually seeing that, even though that's not the way I would have ideally liked it to manifest. But you are seeing that now. You are seeing like prominent Tory MPs come out and start talking about like. Yeah, at the moment they're still confining it to a class basis as well. They're talking about the white working class, but it's still being talked about in ways that it wouldn't have been, 20 years ago.
All right, let me just say what I see. I don't watch the mainstream media. The only way I watch mainstream media is via videos on YouTube and stuff like this. My TV has not been switched on in 3.5 years. But what I see is this. I see every time there's an anti-lockdown protest, there are absolute lies spoken. And I'm talking about Australia, but I've seen the same thing happening in Britain, in Germany, in France, in Italy, all over the place. And also in the US. Every time I see an anti-lockdown protest, the mainstream media either totally ignores it, or if they cover it at all, they say there was a few hundred or a few score people there, and the violence was started by the anti-lockdown protesters, which is absolute nonsense because, like, a fair number of anti-lockdown protesters are women for a start, and white women at that, who are not the world's most violent people in my experience. Certainly, unless you really piss them off and they throw a vase at you. But this is what you get constantly. Whereas if you get a Black Lives Matter protest, or you get a a Globo Homo greeny watermelon green protest, then it's fully covered. The numbers are exaggerated, and they never do any wrong whatsoever. And to me, that is not accidental. That is deliberate. There is enough crossover, which I think even AA admits these days. There is enough crossover between the MSM and the government that they're almost the same bloody thing anyway, you know? And it's so clear to me that there is a complete and total bias against straight white men, complete and total bias against straight white men, and a pretty complete and straight bias against white people generally. I don't understand how any intelligent person can say, no, there's no truth in that whatsoever. And I strongly suspect that neither Adam or Ozzy or Napoleon would say that there was no truth in that whatsoever.
It's not that there is a discrimination against one group or the other. It's that
come on,
the discrimination is.
You're not really saying that, are you?
What?
Are
The
you
thing is,
really saying that?
So, it's not that there is.
Saying there's not.
Well,
Sorry, carry on, mate. Carry on.
Maybe we won't. But maybe we'll never know because I keep getting interrupted.
Carry on.
So, it's not that there isn't discrimination against certain groups over others. It's that they happen for certain reasons. I do not think those reasons are because top people are self-hating white people. I believe that they still police us because they know it's effective.
What do you think about that, Armin?
I don't disagree. I think there is a certain aspect of disdain in there, but you have things like sort of new Labour education reforms, which were obviously designed to help Blair voting areas, which also happen to be largely minority areas. That led to some of the disparities we see in education now, along with various other cultural shifts.
But you don't see a lot of Conservative MPs turning around and saying, "Oh yeah, well, white people are getting a bad deal in Britain these days." Do you?
No, they don't.
Yeah, I don't think they do either. But I mean, I presume that there are Conservative MPs who are at least as intelligent as me.
Well, I mean, there was.
I can see that that's what's actually happening.
Well, I mean, there was. Oh, I can't remember his name. I'm sure someone in chat knows. There was a Tory MP that was talking about the disparity in education, where white working class boys are left behind. I mean, you can take that one step further and say that when you take into account financial background and age and gender, my whites are the most are the worst performing in education and university attainment across all those groups.
Yeah.
But they're not yet at the point where they'll talk about it on that level.
Right. Anything on this, Napoleon?
I think it's a mess, and I think Ozzy and Atman kind of already gave the input that I was going to give. So yeah, I just think like Atman is like somewhere around where I am, but Ozzy isn't. Because I just think like it's so obvious now. Like you've only got to watch almost any TV show or film, movie if you're an American, or TV advert, and all you get constantly is pretty much anti-straight white male propaganda. Yeah,
like most of the time.
Yeah, the reason I guess the MSM does it is for money, and that's just it. I don't think there's like an ultra secret hidden agenda, but I do think that the government.
But why does that make them more money? Why would that make them more money? I don't understand.
Because take Netflix for example, they make a lot of money.
But have you watched much Netflix? Because I don't.
Doesn't matter.
Netflix.
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter whether I watch it, but I used to watch it. I don't anymore.
Yeah, I'd
But,
watch it, but I don't pay for it. But the point
well,
I'm making is
the reason.
most of their movies, and I don't mean like half of them, I mean more than 3/4 of them are basically anti-straight white male propaganda one way or another.
Yeah. And people watch that and they make money. If people didn't watch that, then they wouldn't be making money and they would go for another angle.
I'm not sure about this. You see, this is where I lose touch with some of you guys, because it's pretty obvious to me
Yeah.
that Hollywood is now making flops that
Yeah.
are flopping precisely because of that, but they're still making them.
Right, yeah, I really don't like generalizations. I think you have to break it down into specific examples. There are, of course, people who are like diehard anti us no matter what. But I'd say perhaps the majority of people of the MSM are just doing it for money. Maybe not the majority, but I can't quantify it. I can only go by
All right.
feelings.
Let me give another example. I on-gabbed earlier today, and this relates back to AA, because AA, for reasons best known to himself, likes wrestling, which, as far as I was concerned, was always like a bad acting job. But AA likes wrestling for whatever reason, and WWF, or whatever the fuck it's called these days. Their most recent one is this big black guy comes on into the ring. This white bloke comes on with his missus or his girlfriend, and this big black bloke comes into the ring, beats him up, and then kisses and fake fucks his wife in the middle of the ring. That's WWF now.
Yeah, that is pretty fucked up.
I mean, come on, guys. I mean, how much do they need to do this stuff?
Well, no,
before
I'm not.
People open their eyes and say, "Hang on, this is bollocks. What's going on here?"
I think what you're looking for is an explicit reaction, when I don't think it's necessarily required to be an explicit reaction.
Or you think we should be subtle about this?
No, no.
Aussie.
Like, the idea, and I haven't not noticed that your PFP, Napoleon, if that's what you're about to bring up.
What a cock.
Anyway,
sorry, go.
It's not that like people will just wake up one morning and say this is a load of crap. It's the idea that they'll slowly start saying, well, I'm not really liking what I see on TV anymore. I don't think I'm going to watch anymore. And then they start doing something else. And people start saying, well, I'm not really interested in going to this whatever anymore, like this Tolkien meeting anymore. I think I'm going to do something else. It's a slow disconnection from, the halls of whatever it is. And at that point, you're not saying something people like going, it's a load of bollocks. It's just that people just slowly start ignoring stuff. It's subtle. It's really subtle.
Are you saying that is happening, or that's what?
I'm saying it to an extent it is. I mean, we already know, for instance, that the Twitter user base is falling. What used to be back in 2008, 2009, mainly one account per person, it basically peaked at 2017. And the only way it maintains its user base since then is by having more people create multiple accounts. I mean, that's the immediate example on top of my head, but there are, box office engagement, maybe one of them. I'm not entirely sure, but I have heard that box office tickets per capita are falling, and the box office industry per capita as part of what people spend is falling, and things like that. So, it's not that you basically have people going, "This is a load of bollocks, Rage Against the Machine, blah blah blah." It's that
But we should have.
Yeah, who cares? It's not. It's Yes, but like in
social
terms of
social disconnection is happening, and that is something that can actually be quantified.
All right, guys. I think we've had quite a lot of discourses on this. I got a few things I want to bring up as my first things to bring up, which I haven't done yet. Adam, you got anything finally to say on that before we move on a bit?
No. I'm
All
turning
right.
down for the night anyway, so I'll probably be off in a few minutes.
Yeah, all right, mate. Well, anyway, I did my usual look at the Bias Brainwashing Corporation before this started, and the first one I noticed was they call me the Irish Hulk of basketball. Aidan Ijihon, who is a black bloke, obviously, says how he's a Irish guy from Dublin who's 20 years old. So I don't know. I mean, that one just struck me as ridiculous.
I would agree.
Yeah,
I would agree.
yeah, Irish guy. Yeah, right. Okay, fair enough. I'm a Zulu too. But anyway, then I watched cash prize jackpot offered for double jab students at Sussex University. They're offering students who get double vaccinated against the China virus a chance to win £5,000 jackpots at Sussex University. I wonder why. Must be such a good jab that will save your life from a disease that won't kill you anyway if you're a student, but there we go. Then we had social workers stabbed and police officers attacked in North London, but they didn't mention the race or anything of the people that did this. So I strongly suspect they're probably not white Indigenous British people. And then there was another one. Hang on, I can't find this. Where the fuck is this? Oh, hang on a minute. The BBC website is just so full of crap. It's unbelievable. Here we go. Taliban seized second regional capital in 2 days. That's just how good we did. Well, about 20 years we were in Afghanistan, getting 600 guys killed and thousands more wounded and maimed. And then we can move on to Namibia, where the leader of Namibia, in a fetching red and khaki uniform, says we require trillions to heal our wounds due to what apparently the Germans did to the Namibians in 1904 and 1908.
Wait, who did what to the Namibians?
The Germans used to,
Germans.
Germany, Southwest Africa used to be German, yeah?
Yeah.
And the South Africans took it over in World War I. And I actually fought there in the 1980s, world's last colonial war. And we never lost any battles, but we apparently didn't win the war. But anyway, the leader of Namibia, who is at the same time as he's saying how many trillions he wants from Germany, presumably, is also slaughtering the San Bushmen people and making them live in villages, which effectively kills them because they're a kind of hunter-gatherer, Stone Age type people. This same guy, whose name is Umisar Kapi, in his lovely red and khaki uniform, is requiring trillions of dollars to make up for the wounds that happened in Namibia from the Germans between 1904 and 1908. And apparently this is perfectly all right. And the BBC have written this enormous great article about how terrible the Germans were and how wonderful the Namibians are. And it makes me sick, guys. It just makes me sick. And this is pushed across to our people as if it was history, which it certainly ain't, you know.
Mm.
It was a tribal rebellion, and the Germans crushed it more harshly than the British would have, because the British were pretty soft-hearted in that sort of way for the most part.
We weren't harsh enough.
Yeah, we weren't as harsh as we should have been sometimes, but it's just like as I say, watch any advert on Western TV, watch most of the TV programs, watch the vast majority of the Hollywood movies, and you've got to be thick to not notice that they're basically all anti-straight white male propaganda, and many of them are basically just anti-white propaganda. The only reason they're not all totally that way is that women are still considered somewhere on that stack of poor people, and they're going to get chucked off that pretty quickly in the same way that even white gay people are going to be. But there you go. That's my opinion on that stuff, and I don't know, man. And also, the other thing I'd say about the Germans in Southwest Africa is that the Germans fought in East Africa mainly with black African soldiers for the whole of the First World War. Now, if the Germans had been that terrible to the black Africans, I don't think they would have fought for them. But that's just my opinion, as a soldier. Generally, I think if your officers are shitbags to you, you're not going to follow them, are you, really? Or maybe that's too common sense for anyone these days. I just, it's just utter nonsense. It's silliness. It's stupidity. But no one says a word about it. And Aussie will say, oh, no, well, okay, people are slowly disengaging. I think we've got to do a lot more than that. We've actually got to say, look, we're not going to put up with this shit anymore. I really do. And if we don't, we're lost. I'm not suggesting any form of violence. I'm suggesting very heated letters to the BBC by the million. Very heated letters to your MP by the million. That's what we've got to do. And if we don't do that, we are going to be lost. We won't put up with this shit anymore. We're fed up with having our heroes from the 19th century statues torn down. I don't want to see every single advert having a mixed race couple, because that isn't how people are.
Yeah, but we all know this. You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, I know I am, but I'm trying to explain that, Ozzy was just telling me, oh no, we need to do it gently. I'm sorry, we don't.
I'm not saying we need to do anything at all. In fact, I think I don't even necessarily think we need to do something. I mean, okay, even if we did something, I don't think it would have any sort of effect.
Well, not even millions and millions of letters to the BBC and MPs.
Yeah, how are you going to get those millions and millions of letters, mate?
Well, I mean, emails and stuff. I'm talking.
Trying to say that.
Sorry,
I can't hear you, mate.
Carry on, mate.
Ozzy, are you trying to say that a reaction will happen naturally and eventually without any kind of conscious letters to the BBC and stuff?
Yes, I don't think it's going to be like when I formulated that states are going to just start detaching. They're not going to officially say, I execrate you, this is wrong, blah, blah, blah. They're just going to slowly start doing different things differently. It's not
okay.
It's not, no one declares an active rebellion. No one says, I am actively against this. It's just a sort of slow sort of, you're told to do something and you don't do it. And then they don't really have the energy to stop you. It's, there you go.
Yeah, but right. Sorry. Wouldn't you think that what Chuk is suggesting would be a good catalyst for people to vote for more actively for, say, ideas like ours, for example?
So
if people knew that this was happening.
I mean, if they knew, I mean, it depends in the context of what they know, and it depends, I don't think most people are that politically involved. I've got to be real with you.
No.
I really, and I don't think you could ever even dream of getting 10,000 people to write a letter to their local MP about a given issue. Sure, they might sign some meaningless petition online, but that's pretty easy, all being said and done. And like, so first of all, I think this idea of like active resistance is a bit unrealistic in the short term. But I also like, if it happened, then great. But like, I could be wrong. But I would also put forward that you know, you're not ever going to see like a sort of most of these people will not be thinking about things politically. They're just a lot of it will just be linked to things like disgust. Disgust is quite interesting emotional reaction, because a lot of the time you don't even register disgust, but your brain automatically modifies your behavior anyway, so you avoid it in the future. If you show people channels, adverts with certain kinds of couples, subconsciously people will start avoiding how they got into that sort of situation. And I think this is just what you're going to slowly start seeing over time. Could I be wrong? Yes. Is it ideal? No. But is anything else in any way realistic? No. Gotta be honest.
I don't agree with that. People are taking the piss out of me in the chat because I'm saying send letters and send emails. I don't think there's any point in sending emails and letters to immigrants to not come to UK, which is what Sargon Cab was suggesting. I think that's pathetic and stupid. But I do think millions of emails and letters to the BBC might stop them, and MPs might make them stop and think a little bit. But I also agree with what Hal Stowe says. White people are not sticking up for their race in any situation. Totally agree with that. They're not.
Well, I mean, the thing is,
I don't agree with. Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, it depends on who you're writing to, doesn't it? Like, I'm not going to write to my local MP because it's a complete waste of fresh air. But you can write that. I mean, it depends on your local MP. If your local MP is Edward Lee or someone from the Common Sense group, you're probably and sometimes you can just write a letter just to get it off your chest because they are going to read it, and you can think about that as well depending on who you're writing to. But yeah, it's not strictly an effective strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not strictly an effective strategy, but it's better than not doing anything.
Well, no, but you don't have to do nothing. You can just do something more effective.
Well, I don't know. Can't you do something more effective than that?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? It can take quite a lot of energy out of the day if you're spending too much time on it. And the thing is, as well, like one of the things I find with right-wing circles is you don't want to direct someone towards something that is ineffective because they will end up putting a bit too much time and effort into it.
Yeah,
and the right can get caught up in these sort of spurgy little traps, if you know what I mean.
We can, but we can also get caught up with the NRX thing of not doing fuck all.
Well, I don't think it's strictly not doing anything, but I'm not.
I know you don't, mate. I'm not accusing you of that. I know you do stuff in real life, so I'm not saying that about you. But I think a lot of people can get caught up in that idea and say, "All right, then, yeah, right, okay, And Rory Herbert, I don't know any regiment where you can only join as a trooper in the British Army. If it's the British Army you're talking about, because I don't think there are any, frankly. If you can tell me of one, I'll certainly listen to you, but I don't know any. And, there are regiments you can't join from the street, but if you're an officer, you're still going to be an officer when you transfer to a SF regiment in the British Army, for example. They don't demote you.
Anyway, I've got to head off. I've stayed longer than I
Yeah.
was going to anyway.
Yeah,
so
no
it's
worries.
quite,
Thank you
it's quite a
very
good
much for
conversation.
coming.
All
Thanks
right,
for
see
coming
you
on,
later.
Albert. It was
Yeah,
interesting.
see you, mate.
Yeah. We're not going to go much longer,
You.
guys. We're going to finish at the top of the hour. So if you've got any final points to bring up, now's the time to do it.
I should probably explain why we constantly score lowest on in-group preference. It's been a trait for over 70 years. I think it's been for longer than that, to be honest. And the reason why is because in Europe, how do I say this? Our core value is individualism, and it has been for a very long time. Not for the entire time, but it has been for a very long time. And you see places like the Middle East and Asia where they kind of valued things like duty and religion and family more than we did. Some might disagree with me, but this is just a fact. But the reason why our core value was individualism, because it allowed us to, how do I say this? In a simple way, we made basically over 85% of all advancement and inventions was made in Europe. That's just a fact. But the reason why, the reason why it's so, how do you say, consistent nowadays of people, white people specifically, not identifying with their group and having a preference towards it is because of subversion. And a lot of it's on purpose, a lot of it isn't. But that's not something that I think we can get into.
Well, we can, but maybe not this late in the stream. Ozzy, any final points?
Okay. So actionable solutions. If I'm right, and I've said this before, one of the best things you can do is move to a rural area.
Yeah, agreed.
And one of the next best things you can do is that if local power is going to become the new meta, which I think it possibly could be, I could also be wrong, you should probably try and get yourself in on councils. And don't do anything explicit. Don't do things like, oh, I want to do this, and this. Like, I want to close the borders and restore traditional values. But like, you can get it on a normal platform. But then all of a sudden, if you get something like the government says, oh, we need you to take 30 refugees in, you just say, yeah, but we don't really have the space for that. Or, no, we're not going to take them in. That's just kind of inconvenient. Or the government says, can you make planning permission for a new mosque? You can say, no, there's not really an obvious place to put it. You just slowly start being a nuisance. And if you want an actionable solution, that is the solution I see. And then, like, over time, as you're there, you can invite your friends and family over, and you can start building, something that might be robust. Do I think letters to MPs will work? I don't know.
But they won't hurt. But they won't hurt.
It won't hurt. I mean,
Yeah, that's
it
my
could
point.
it could possibly hurt actually, because
How?
if you say something stupid and it's traced back to you, now GCHQ has your number.
Yeah, hang on. Look, hang on. I'm not talking about saying things that are stupid. I'm talking about saying things that are simply, I'm really bored with this anti-white propaganda all the time.
Yeah, but
that's not stupid.
No, but mate, I'm pretty sure that even that could be traced back to you, because you see, you're making a positive. You're making.
Well,
something
I don't care if they trace that back to me, because
Okay.
that's
Well,
not against the law. That's
sure,
not against the law.
Sure, but you could get that under a hate incident or whatever it is in the UK. But like, I think you should probably just be. I'm not saying like you should probably try and change the entire world, because I don't think that's beyond the pale now. But like, if you're just like in these nice little, small little places, and you can basically start saying, no, we're not going to do that, and oh, we don't, we're not going to give you the money for that, or you just slowly start being more and more of a nuisance. I think, the first 2 or 3 times councils start doing this, the government may shut it down. But over time, as it builds up, you might actually get somewhere. So this is, if you're thinking about an actual realistic solution, this is what I would go with.
Sweet.
I notice you now point to the void, Napoleon.
I can change that.
Yeah. Anyway,
I don't know, guys. Like, if saying I'm fed up with all this anti-white propaganda is going to be a hate incident, then I think we're lost. I mean, yeah, all right. I guess a black supremacist, Black Lives Matter person could probably say that was hate, but we all know they're lying. It's a bit like that brilliant thing, it's okay to be white. That isn't a hate thing. It's not having a go at anybody. It's just saying it's okay to be white. It's not even saying it's brilliant to be white. It's just saying it's okay to be white. I think we've got to be very careful about adopting the left's ideas, which is kind of where I feel a bit you're coming from there, Ozzy.
Nah.
I know. Don't get me wrong. I know you're a good chap, and I know your beliefs are not so far out of line with mine. I'm not saying that, but I just think you're a bit too inclined. Maybe because you're a bit younger than me, you're a bit too inclined to adopt this left position instead of saying, "No, it's bollocks, mate."
Left position of what exactly, though?
Well, the saying I'm fed up with all this anti-white propaganda could get you in a hate crime thing. That's a left.
I'm not saying. Well, that's a factual statement. It's not a statement of opinion. That's a fact.
I don't think it really could, to be honest with you. Just saying.
Do you want to look up what a hate incident is?
I've seen it. It's crap.
Yeah, but it exists, and you can get them on your criminal record.
No, you can't, because it's not.
Yes, you can. They go on your criminal record.
Not on your criminal record.
Yes, they do.
No, hang on.
Ozzy, calm down. You'll break your eyelashes.
Mate, they don't go on your criminal record. They go on your non-criminal record. You do know that, we now live in a country where you get a non-criminal record.
Yeah, it's absurd. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it is absurd. Yeah.
If you apply for a company, you want a job.
Yeah, it could lose you a job. Yeah, I know that. Yeah. And,
all of a sudden they pull up and they pull up your file and it said, the N-word in a nightclub 4 years ago.
Yeah,
all right.
You understand? I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm fed up with this anti-white propaganda. No N-word in there, is there?
Yes, but that could be even worse because it says wrote a pamphlet saying a dog whistling of racial supremacist movement.
Well, didn't write a pamphlet, just wrote a sentence. But all right. But
how these people skew this stuff.
Yeah, but I know how these people do. But what you're doing is giving in to them and saying, "Yeah, no, that's all right then." I'm not saying
it's all right. I'm just accepting I can't do anything about it.
Well, I disagree with that. But then, I'm a much older Englishman than you, when it was a lot more free country than it is now. So, I mean, I see what you're saying, but I just think it's different. All right, guys, we're going to close there.
All right. Cheers, mate.
No worries. Thanks for coming on, Ozzy. Thanks for coming on, Napoleon, and Adam as well earlier. We're going to play ourselves out with a tune, and this one is Sorry Murray. And Sorry Murray is a regimental march of Her Majesty's Royal Marines, Her Majesty's Royal Marines Commandos. And how it came about was it was a traditional, I'm not interested in what Right Reaction is saying. even if it's the real right reaction. How Sorry Maraes came about was when the commandos were formed in World War II by Winston Churchill, he was basing them on the Boer Afrikaner commandos he remembered from the Anglo-Boer War, 1899-1902. And so they adopted Sorry Marae as a song. And it's still one of the regimental marches of Her Majesty's Royal Marines. Yeah, I will definitely see Lady of Shalott on an Apostolic Majesty stream. Okay, so let's play this tune. Just to play this out. Oh, by the way, guys, let me just say, next Friday, it's possible I'll be doing a stream with the excellent Australian YouTuber, The Franklin. Hasn't been confirmed yet, but I might be. So that'll be something to look out for. Okay, folks, that was Sorry Marae, Quick March of the Royal Marines Commandos. We'll see you next week for the next edition of Splendid Isolation, if we don't see you before that. And please remember to like and subscribe to the stream. Have a good day, everybody.
Cheerio.